In this series, I will show you how to set up the simple modular inventory that can be added to absolutely anything. And in this episode, we will be setting up the interfaces for optimal communication, as well as the widgets that will display the entire system. So let's go ahead and hop right into step 1, which is creating all the interfaces. Alright, so inside of the folder you created in part 1, right click and create a new folder and call this interfaces. Open it up. Inside of here, we're going to need 5 interfaces. So to create one, right click, go to blueprint, blueprint interface, and then call this first one BPI underscore inventory object. And if you are unfamiliar what an interface actually is, it's a list of functions that we can call on like an object, but we don't necessarily need to know the object's type. But for now, we're going to need 4 more, so create another one. This one will be called BPI underscore interact. It will be called on objects that we actually want to interact with in the world. Again, you would make a whole interaction system for this, but I'm just doing a simple interface because this is a inventory tutorial. So the next one you want to call BPI underscore inventory. This will essentially hold all the functions for the actual inventory, and this will be stored in our inventory component. The next one is going to be called BPI underscore inventory widget, and this will just hold the communications for all of the user interface elements. This will essentially allow the inventory component to communicate to the inventory widget without needing to have that direct reference like I was talking about earlier. And last but not least, we're going to need a BPI underscore pickup. This is so whenever we drop objects, we can actually provide information back into the object that we actually drop on the ground. And again, it allows us to not have to directly cast to the object we drop. Alright, so once you have them all created, go ahead and make sure you file, save all, and now we can go ahead and go to the next step, which is actually populating these interfaces with these functions that we will be calling. Alright, so the first interface we're going to fully set up is the inventory object, so go ahead and double click it to open it. Once it's open, as you can see, this is our functions that we'll be creating. So go over here on this function, click it, and actually I have to right click it and hit rename. And I'm going to rename this to use, just like that. And then I'm going to add one more function to this, and I'm going to call this one set object type, just like that. And this set object type will also have an input down here it will take in. So click the little plus right here and call this item type because we're setting the object type. And for the variable type right here, just search for item type and choose your item type. And so now you can be sure to compile and save this and close that inventory object. Alright, so the next easy one is BPI interact, so go ahead and open this one up. Inside of here, these functions are going to be pretty similar to the last one. The first function is going to be called interact with item, and just in case you want to have like multiple inventory components in your character or whatever, you can also add a input right here and call this inventory component. And then for the variable type, search for actor component right here, and you could do a hard reference to this because again, actor components are all loaded into memory pretty much always, so it's perfectly fine to have hard references to it. And again, I hope you can sort of see what these interfaces actually are doing, because we're going to be storing this inventory component as an actor component, but we're going to be checking if this actor component implements this interface, and if it does, then we can call functions on the inventory component that we otherwise wouldn't have access to unless we casted. But anyways, moving on, we need one more function in here, so add function and call this one set item type. Alright, and again, this one's going to need an input as well. So click the little plus and name it type. And for the value right here, do item type, just like before. And so that's really everything that the interact interface needs. So we can move on to the next one. Oh, and be sure to compile and save as always. All of these you want to make sure you compile and save. You might have to compile twice because I think they also compile each function individually sometimes. So just be aware of that. You may click it and then hit save, and then it might say you have to compile again. Alright, and so the next one we are going to be setting up is the inventory. So go ahead and open this up. And for the first function right here, we are going to name this add item. And its input, it's going to need one input called inventory data. And the type is going to be inventory data. And then add another function. And this one's going to be called remove item. And this one is going to need 3 inputs right here. The first one is going to be called index, which will just ask what index in the item array we want to remove, and set this to a integer. The next is going to be amount, and then the third is going to be all, and the last one right here is going to be a boolean as well. The first two are integers. What this all will do is it's just a simple way, instead of having to say have like multiple interface functions, where we have one where it's remove certain number of items and then remove all items, we can sort of combine it in just one function. So we can just have a boolean flag that's just, if we check it, then it removes everything essentially. Alright, so the next function we'll need in here is one for open inventory. And if you couldn't have guessed already, we will need one last one for close inventory. And these two don't need any parameters passed in. So now be sure you compile and save however many times it makes you do it. And we can close out of this one and open up our BPI inventory widget right here. So inside of here, the first function we'll need is rename this one, and it'll be populate grid. And this will take in one input, and it'll be inventory data. And this will be of type inventory data, like this. And also click this little drop down right here so you can change the type and set this to an array, because we're going to be passing all of our inventory data into the widget whenever it's created. And as you can see, once you create it as an array, it will automatically pass it by reference as well. So the next function, you can go ahead and click add function. This is set display status. And for the input right here, just do new visibility. And for the type, do slate visibility right here. And make sure it's not an array, it's just single like that. And then the next one we will need is another function called update grid slot. And then this will take in a parameter called new item. And this will be our inventory data as well, except this time it won't be an array. So we'll have to come down here and manually click pass by reference. And also we'll need to pass in an index as well. So just add another variable and call this index and set this to an integer. This is just so that the widget knows exactly which inventory slot to actually apply the update to. Alright, so now the next function we'll need is going to be called adjust slot quantity. And this will need 2 inputs, one called change amount, which will be an integer, and another one for the index. Just like that. And also whenever you click pass by reference, it tends to auto check all of them to pass by reference, and you don't really want that. It's because on small types like integers especially, I'm not quite sure how like Unreal actually handles it, but in C++, if you pass an integer by reference, it actually costs more than if you just passed it normally, if you just copied it in the function. But again, I'm not sure how Unreal handles it, so that's just from a C++ perspective. Because Unreal probably does some stuff in the background that will probably pass stuff by reference anyways and whatnot. But anyways, the last function we'll need in this one is going to be called set inventory component reference. And this one will be a inventory component. And so this is where a little thing comes in. So in this inventory, every inventory component doesn't necessarily need like a display, like an inventory widget at all times. However, all inventory widgets need an inventory component. So this is where a little bit of the hard references start getting a little confused here. Because in the widget, like if there's always going to be an inventory component in memory whenever we load an inventory widget, then we can safely just pass by hard reference the inventory component right into. However, on the other hand, the widget in the inventory component, we use soft references for that because there's not always going to be an inventory widget in memory, if that makes sense. But essentially, you just need to change this inventory component type right here to our BP inventory component and make it a object reference like that. And so we can now compile and save this one, close out of it, and we can now, last but not least, open up our pickup. Instead of the pickup right here, we're going to need a few functions. So rename this one to set default data, and it's going to need one input right here, and it's going to be called item data. And then the struct is going to be item data. And then the next function we'll need is called add quantity, and then it's going to need one input that is a integer, and this will be called amount to add. Next, we're going to be able to get this quantity, so make another function called get quantity, like that. And this time, this function is going to actually output a value, and it's going to output quantity, like that. Next, we're going to need another one that's called get item name, and this is going to output a item name, and the value of this is going to be a string. And last, we're going to make another function called set quantity, and this is going to need one input right here, and it's going to be new quantity, and of course it's going to be a integer. And so now you can, after you compile and save this, you close out of it, that's all the interfaces set up. So now we can move on to step 2, which is going to be setting up the actual widgets themselves. So then we can start actually displaying stuff in future episodes and get the inventory actually working. Alright, so for the widgets, you want to right click and create you another folder and call this widgets, and open this up, and we're going to need 6 different widgets. Now, since this video is getting kind of long, I'm going to create all the widgets, but I'm not going to fully flesh them all out. I'm going to flesh out about 2 of them. The 2 most important ones that we need coming up. Maybe in an episode or 2 we can flesh out the rest of them. But to get started, I'm going to right click and create a user interface widget blueprint, user widget. I'm going to call this one WBP underscore context menu. This is going to be like our right click menu that pops up that allows you to drop, use, and all that good stuff. Then I'm going to right click, add another user widget, and this one's going to be called WBP drop amount menu. This is the menu that will actually let you type in how many of an item you want to drop. So now this next widget is going to be called WBP HUD. And I'm going to add widget onto the end of it as well, just so it's separated from the actual HUD. Now you may already have a HUD widget created. If you do, great. You don't need to create this. But this is just assuming that you have like nothing created. Alright, so for this next widget, go ahead and create you another one. And go ahead and call this WBP underscore inventory. As you could have guessed, this is going to be the overarching inventory widget that will contain all the rest of the stuff. Next, create you another widget and name this one WBP item label. This will be the label whenever you hover over an item, it will display stuff. And last but not least, go ahead and create you one last widget and call this WBP underscore item slot. And this, as you could guess, is the individual item slots that are in the inventory. Alright, so I know this tutorial was another one that doesn't really have any like visual updates, but as you can see, this is what like the final product could look like. Obviously you could change your art in it and stuff, but as you can see, I can right click, drop all, and it'll create new stacks for the items. It'll create a stack of 10 and 9 because the max stacks for the arrows is 10 and I dropped 19. So it creates 2 stacks of arrows. And then if I come over here to these arrows and say I drop all, right here, it'll disperse the arrows into these piles and set them up to 10. And obviously if I pick up an item like a sharp sword that doesn't stack like this, and I do drop all, then it doesn't stack it. And drop all, it doesn't stack it. And some of the stuff I don't have artwork in because again, this isn't an art tutorial, so a lot of art won't be provided. But I will have some stuff I can provide, but a majority of it is going to be starter content, textures and stuff. But if you enjoy the series so far, then leave a like and subscribe for more, and I will see you next time. Bye bye.